Friday to see the doctor and see what's going on there. He even sent me a photo and asked me my opinion to see if there was any infection or anything going on. So quite concerned there. Brother Weldon made it home finally yesterday, so that's good news. We've got several families traveling. The Conyers are in Florida, the Mongs are in Arkansas, the Mayfields are they traveling this week or last? They were gone, they're here, and they're not back there, so they might be traveling again. Oh, okay. And Lisa is going to be going back to for another visit here shortly. Uh, if you didn't see the email, Brother Moody had been not feeling well. He says he's some better today. Anything else that we need to take into account before we start? Since I mentioned your name, Brother Kevin, would you lead us in a prayer, please? Amen. We're just hitting the tops of some of these subjects as we're going through to complete the book of Deuteronomy. We've already mentioned that the book consists of basically 3 sermons or 3 speeches by Moses. And Wednesday night, Brother Jeremy started us in chapter 27, starts the 3rd one of his speeches, and we're down to chapter 28 this morning. And the first 14 verses of this chapter deal with God will bless. And I just want to point out a few things as we go through. Reading first, the first 2 verses. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. And then if you look at the next few verses, we won't read them all, but verse 3, blessed shalt. 4, blessed. 5, blessed. 6, blessed. 7, the Lord shall cause. 8, the Lord shall. 9, the Lord shall. 11, Lord shall. 12, Lord shall. 13, and the Lord shall make thee head and not the tail, and thou shalt be above only, and thou shalt not be beneath. If, I want to emphasize that word, if, that thou hearken unto the commandment of the Lord thy God, which I command thee this day, to observe and to do them. And thou shalt not go aside from any of the words which I command thee this day, to the right hand or to the left, to go after other gods to serve them. So we just mentioned that these first 14 verses deal with God will bless you, but what is the central theme of God will bless you? Be faithful. If thou will keep the commandments, God will do all these things. He's going to bless you. He will do what he says he will do. Absolutely. No problems, right? Anything else on the first 14? Because we go into contrast when we look at the next section. Verses 15 on through deals with curses for disobeying. And we're going to start the same way. Verse 15, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do his commandments and his statutes which I command this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. 16 cursed, 17 cursed, 18 cursed, 19 cursed twice in that one. Verse 20 then says, the Lord shall send upon thee cursings, vexation, and rebuke, and all that thou settest thine hand unto for to do, until thou be destroyed, until thou perish quickly, because of the wickedness of thy doings, whereby thou hast forsaken me. Picking up with verse 21, the Lord shall, 22, the Lord shall, 24, the Lord shall, 25, the Lord shall. Verse 27, the Lord will smite. Verse 28, the Lord shall. And verse 29, and thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in any ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled everywhere, and no man shall save thee. So it continues on to throughout the rest of the chapter, but just pausing there for just a second. If we just look at verse 15 through 29 of all the curses that take place, and we looked at the first 14 of all the blessings that take place, again, what is the common denominator of either being blessed or being cursed? Whether or not you obey or you disobey. If we bring that up to practical application for us today, and I know we're under new law, not this law, but does not the same apply to us today dealing with the New Testament laws? If we obey and follow God and endure to the end, what's going to happen? Crown of life. We're going to make it to heaven. We're going to be with the angels, with God, Holy Spirit, others saved. On the flip side of that, what happens if we don't obey? Are we not promised a reward also if we disobey? But that reward is going to be what? Something bad, the pit, the everlasting, eternal fire. So it's all up to the individual as we look at those. Verse 30 through 44 just goes in and reinforces or talks about the same type things dealing with the curse that the cursings that will take place. It starts listing them then. And then verse 45 picks up with a sort of a new thought. It says, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee and shall pursue thee and overtake thee till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. Again, if we apply that to us today, what does the New Testament tell us about God's commandments? Are they easy? Are they hard? Yoke is easy, his burden's light, his commandments are not grievous. What would make something for us today, what would make it either easy or difficult? I know that's a broad question, but I'm trying to narrow down to one word. Temptation is getting there, but what does temptation deal with? Selfishness. I'm going to have to tell you, attitude. If your attitude is, if you look at a job, something that you have never done before, and you go into it with the attitude of, wow, this looks tough. I don't know if I can do it. What's going to be your process as you go through it? It's going to be a hard task, isn't it? But if, on the other hand, you look at something and say, wow, never done this before. This looks interesting. Let me see how I can do it. What's going to happen? It might be challenging, but the mental attitude, when you get to the end, it's going to be a whole different process. I could point at Jeff and ask Jeff how many times on some of these old cars that he's worked on, how many times he's had to invent ways to get something done, but he does it and it comes out great because of what? Are you going to let something beat you? You're going to win, right? So you're going into it with that attitude. You're going into it with the attitude of, see, I can't remember the movie now, but with positivity. Okay. So it all depends on our attitude, and the same thing deals with God's commandments. They are not grievous to those who have a positive, I'm going to do this attitude, whereas to those who want to do something else, they can be more challenging. Does that make sense? Verse 47, because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord God shall send thee in hunger and in thirst and nakedness and in want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. Again, here we can look at this as the difference between the old law and the new law. Where is the new law? Where did he put the new law? It's on our heart. It's in our heart. Whereas the old law was what? It was written down, and if you look at throughout the history from the Mosaical Law's institution to the first century, one simple set of rules. By the first century, how many different major sects of Jewish religion were there? The Sadducees, Pharisees, the Essenes, subdivisions of all of those. And it was such major differences in them that what did the Pharisees believe when it come to the resurrection? There was. What did the Sadducees believe? There wasn't. So how can people start with one basic set of principles and a few hundred years later wind up with totally opposite views on things? Where did that come from? Pardon? Not God. It came from man, but what made them look at it in these different ways? They started bringing in their personal beliefs, their personal philosophies, their attitudes. So if we were to ask you today, what is your attitude when it comes to the Bible? When you read and study the Bible, do you go into it looking to see what it says and obey what it says? Or do you go reading into it and looking for ways to be like a lawyer and look at the text and find possible exceptions and twist it to meet your needs or your wants? There's a real easy way to study the Bible. All you got to do is ask yourself a few questions. When was it written? Who was it written to? Most people jump from that to how it applies to me today, but what do you have to know before you know how it applies to you today? Why it was written? Well, to when, to whom, the why, and the why basically deals with the to whom. if you know how it applied to them, now you can see how it applies to you, because you can't just jump those cultural ages. So the who, what, when, where, why all has to take place. And if you go into it with a predetermined outlook of what you want it to say, you can make it say it. But if you go into it with an open mind to understand what it is trying to tell you and then obey it, that's the proper and easy way to do it. Questions, comments? Correct. Study. The more you know about a subject, the more likely you are to adhere to it instead of trying to forget what it says and accidentally do something you're not supposed to, right? Any other questions, comments? So it's plain here, at least to me, that you're either going to serve God or you're going to serve somebody else. When we get down to verse 63, it says, "And that shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught, and you shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it." Uh-oh. What about all these people that say God is a loving God? God does not want anybody to be destroyed. God wants everybody to be saved. God is a just God. So God rejoices in the fact that he is going to destroy the non-believer. You can be just without reveling in the punishment. And as Brother Moody said, God is a just God. And this goes into the New Testament also. I've used this many times in my classes and lessons and all. But the favorite verse in the Bible to the religious world is John 3:16. Who can quote John 3:16 or paraphrase it? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Pardon? Okay. God gave his only Son. Why is that the favorite? Because we didn't go to the last part, he that believeth shall be saved. But why is that the favorite of the world religion? God loved, God gave, God saved, and all man has to do is what? Believe. Is that what the rest of the scripture tells us? We're also to do, aren't we? We're to keep his commandments. We have to be active in it. It's not a passive thing, which we can go there a different time. But right there, God is going to be that just God, as Brother Moody said. It's up to us. It was up to them. You obey, you're rewarded this way. You disobey, you're rewarded that way. And then 64 through the end of the chapter goes in and deals with some of those things, how they apply. So the plagues for disobeying. Any questions or comments then on chapter 28? Chapter 29 These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, beside the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. What is the difference between Moab and Horeb? Besides about 40 years. Where is Mount Horeb? Don't we know it as Mount Sinai? All right. So if he gave this to those at Horeb, Mount Sinai, 40 years previously, what group was he talking to? Those that was going to perish in the wilderness. And if he's telling them this now, 40 years later, in the land of Moab, what is about to take place and who is he talking to? I'm sorry? The new generation, those that made it through the wilderness, those that are about to go in and conquer the land of Canaan. The new generation's the one he's talking to. Moses called all Israel and said unto them, Ye have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, and to Pharaoh, and unto all his servants, and to all his land. I'll skip down to verse 5. And I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes are not waxed old upon you, and thy shoe is not waxen old upon thy foot. Now, all of this group wasn't around at Mount Horeb during the original speech, because some were born in the wilderness. You know, they've got basically the same number about to go in as they started with, and we know that whole generation died off. So what does he mean there by you have seen all the miracles? God was still taking care of them in the wilderness. Parents would pass down information of all of these things too. So maybe they didn't see it visually, but they knew it through hand-me-down history. But when Jeremy said that he took care of them in the wilderness, how many of you in here have a pair of 40-year-old shoes that you've worn every day that are still serviceable? Or garments? 40 years. Yeah, 4 years. I might be lucky to get. What about the manna that was given to them? What about the other food? What about the water? You know, it's kind of interesting that mankind, humans, need a certain amount of vitamins of all descriptions. We won't get into all the different things that the body needs to stay healthy. But when God provided manna from heaven for them, what it amounted to was a little sweet piece of bread, according to all the descriptions that are given. But in that one little thing that was passed down that they ate, it contained everything to keep them healthy. Wasn't that in itself a miracle? Because if we sit down and we only eat one type of food today, how many of you like corn? What if corn is the only thing you ate? How healthy would you be? Not very. We need all those things. And so God took care of them. So that's part of the miracles they saw. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
and realize that the same application applies. God takes care of them wherever they happen to be. And the same lesson, I think, really should apply to us today. You know, we don't have the same miracles that occurred even in the New Testament, but the same God that provided for those people miraculously is the same God that provides for us today. The means may be different, but the motive and the end will be the same. We need to remember that it is the same God, and God the same comfort and confidence in what He is doing and able to do.
Yes, sir. And Moses had written it down. We have it written down. So, verse 9 then says, "Keep therefore the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. Ye stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God." And then it goes on, verse 12, "that thou shouldest enter into a covenant with the Lord thy God." Verse 13, "that he may establish thee today for a people unto himself, and that he may be unto thee a God, as he has said unto thee, and as he hath sworn unto thy fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob." Verse 14 and 15, "Neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but with him that standeth here with us today before the Lord our God, and also with him that is not here with us today. For ye know how we have dwelt in the land of Egypt, and how we came through the nations which ye passed by, and ye have seen their abominations, and their idols, wood and stone, silver and gold, which were among them. Lest there should be any among you, man or woman or family or tribe, whose heart turneth away this day from the Lord our God, to go and serve the gods of these nations, lest there should be among you a root that beareth gall and wormwood." So again, Moses is really trying to encourage him at this point to follow God and do what God says, to make that covenant with him and obey him, and not go after all these strange idols and gods. How easy is that for us in the United States today, for us to stick with the one true God versus go after all the false gods? Hard because there's so many. I had one head go this way. It's pretty easy, isn't it? No easier, no more difficult, but what is the key component to whether you do or don't? Bingo. Back to attitude. How you look at it. What do you want to do? Verse 22, "So that the generation to come of your children that shall rise up after you, and the stranger that shall come from a far land, shall say, when they see the plagues of that land and the sicknesses which the Lord had laid upon it, and that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning, that it is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboam, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and in his wrath." Verse 29, "The secret things belong unto the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." It all basically boils down to keeping God's commandments and doing his law. And what is one of again, if we bring it back up to today's time, we hear the words mega churches. Why are there so many mega churches today? There can be a location where there's not a church, and all of a sudden there's a mega church. 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people attend. What is attracting them to that? I'm sorry? Everybody loves marshmallows. Okay. I was going to say it's all bells and baubles. They all it's all the glitter and the glamour. One of them I saw on TV yesterday, I think it was. They had a full orchestra down there, and not classic orchestra. I'm talking about a full band complement, and singing and shouting and dancing and hooping and hollering. Is that what the Lord wants? How does a magician work? He does this little shiny object over here to get your attention while he does what? Deceives you with this. So the only they love to have their ears tickled. New Testament phrase, very good. Questions or comments through 29? Chapter 30 then. And it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessings and the curse which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee, and shall return unto the Lord thy God, and shall obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. So he's telling them is if you do the right things, I'm with you. If you do the wrong things, I'm not. Verses 4 through 7 just goes into a little bit of detail on that. Verse 8, and thou shalt return and obey the voice of the Lord and do all his commandments which I command thee this day. Again, if you look at verse 9, the Lord thy God will do things. At the end of that verse, the Lord will again rejoice over thee for good, as he rejoiced over the fathers. Verse 10, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in this book of the law. Who wrote this book of the law? God by Moses' hand, correct? And if thou turn unto the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul. And this is where I get personally hung up on using the word attitude. Attitude means the way you look at something and the way you do something. And I'm going to pick on Jeff again. How many projects have turned out extremely well for you if you've gone into it half-hearted, which you never do, I know. But if you were to go into a project half-hearted, what would happen? Bad results, bad reputation. So here it says you do it with your whole heart. And that's one reason I like Psalms 119:11 so much. I use that a lot. Can anybody paraphrase Psalms 119:11 with me? Thy word have I hidden in my heart, that what? That I might not sin against thee. So if you keep it close to your heart, if it's all with the attitude of doing what, because verse 11 says, for this commandment which I command thee this day is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off. In simple language, what does that one verse tell us when it says the commandment is not hidden and the commandment is not far off? Means it's obvious. It's right there. Easy for you to lay your hands on, your eyes on. Easy for you to get. You don't have to go searching for it. verse 14, verse 12 and 13 tells where it's not, and then verse 14 says, but the word is very nigh unto thee, in thy mouth, in thy heart, that thou mayest do it. It's not just there for knowledge, it's there for application. Well, when mine were growing up, and I said, did you know this? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, why did you do it to... And I think God could have that same question for us if we know and don't. So here he says, that thou mayest do. In verse 16, in that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commandments and his statutes, his judgments, that thou mayest live and multiply, and the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land whither thou goest. Again, now we switch gears. But if thine heart turn away, so that thou wilt not hear, but shall be drawn away and worship other gods and serve them. Look how strong this next phrase is. I denounce unto you this day that ye shall surely perish. You do what's right, you do what's wrong, you're going to perish. And that ye shall not prolong your days. And it closes out in verse 20, that thou mayest love the Lord thy God, and that thou mayest obey his voice. And it doesn't stop there. I want you to pay real close attention to this closing verse. I've underlined a few words here. All of this is done that thou mayest love the Lord thy God, that thou mayest obey his voice, mayest cleave unto him. And what does the word cleave again mean? We've discussed it, but again, the significance of the word cleave. Graft, bind. But then look what's next. For he is thy life. So we're to do all of these things out of love, obedience, cling to him, bind to him, because he is our life. Questions or comments through chapter 30 then?
Future blessing that would be there. Also, I thank the Lord, they would not receive doom that was fall on their disobedience. They couldn't look into the future and see any of these things happen.
All right.
But because of the promises of the good stuff, it should have been very evident that they would do that. But they didn't.
Correct. Now, chapter 31, I saw Luke get up to count, so we've only got a few more minutes, but I wanted to at least get started on this, then Jeremy can pick it up Wednesday night. There's about to be a transition here. Moses went and spake these words unto all Israel. He had had his first speech, his second speech, and now he's concluding his third speech. He spoke all those words unto Israel, and he said unto them, I am 120 years old this day. I can no more go out and come in. Also, the Lord has said to me, thou shalt not go over this Jordan. Moses is about to close out his time here. Verse 3, the Lord thy God, he will go over before thee. The Lord the God was with them all the way from Egypt to this point. Using Moses. Moses is going to go away, but God is still going to go over with them. So then he tells them in verse 6 to be strong and of good courage, and fear not, nor be afraid of them, for the Lord thy God, he it is that doth goeth with thee. God will not fail thee. God will not forsake thee. Today, does God fail us? Does God forsake us? He hasn't and he won't. We can turn our back on him, but he does not turn his back on us, so to speak. Verse 7, Then Moses called unto Joshua and said unto him in the sight of all Israel, Be strong and of good courage, for thou must go with this people into the land which the Lord hath sworn unto their fathers to give them, and thou shalt cause them to inherit it. Change of command here. Moses is going to be stepping out of the picture. End of the book, Moses is going to die. Joshua is going to take over the lead. Verse 9, Moses wrote this law, delivered it unto the priests, the sons of Levi, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to all the elders of Israel. Verse 11, when all Israel is come to appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, thou shalt read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men, women, children, the stranger that is within the gates, that they may hear and that they may learn and fear the Lord your God and observe to do all the words of this law, and that their children which have not known anything may hear and learn and fear so long as you live in the land whether you go over to possess. So, the reason it was all written down, reason of the meeting, preparing them to go in, change of command, and then in verse 14 it starts a new paragraph, but it's dealing with Moses and Joshua before God. And the Lord said unto Moses, Behold, the days approach that thou must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tabernacle of the congregation, that I may give him a charge. Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tabernacle. The Lord appeared, verse 15 and verse 16. And the Lord said unto Moses, Behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up and go a whoring after the gods of the strangers of the land, whither they go to be among them, and will forsake me, and break my covenant which I have made with them. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, Are not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they shall have wrought, in that they turned unto other gods. Now let me stop there. So God knows that as soon as they go into this land, Jeremy can pick up here Wednesday night. Thank y'all so much for your attention and comments.